folks, I'm Alfred Adask, and this is Financial Survival, brought to you by Discount Gold and Silver. And our guest is James Corbett, Corbett, from the CorbettReport.com, talking about all things economic and geopolitical and sometimes even humane. I saw he printed an article just lately that only love can defeat the New World Order. Now, that's kind of strange. I mean, the title, are you are you wearing flowers in your hair or anything like that?
Not well. If I had hair, maybe I would, but no, certainly not. It does. I hope it does strike people as a strange sentiment, because I hope it is in 180-degree complete, sharp contrast to everything that people are hearing and experiencing from all of the media, mainstream, alternative, and otherwise, which I have noted, and I talked about just last week on the Corbett Report. I did a episode on You Are Being Programmed to Hate, where I've talked about the hatred and the vitriol and the division and the scorn and the rancor that is being increased and ratcheted up, that I think we all feel, I think we've all seen come bubbling up to the surface, especially during this 2016 selection cycle. And I want to stand in 180-degree complete contrast to that. I want to be on the other side of that fence, not talking about hatred and division and scorn and how you can be at war with your neighbor, but how people can overcome that tendency. And I hope it's not pie in the sky, flowery rhetoric that means nothing. I hope there's something to it, because otherwise we will be divided and ruled.
You know, I watched the election yesterday from 8 o'clock at night until 3 o'clock in the morning, or whenever Trump finally accepted and stopped speaking and whatever. One of the things that impressed me about it, I happen to be a Trump supporter, or at least a Hillary antagonist. I watched people in the Trump audience who were deeply wounded, in the Hillary audience that were deeply wounded when she lost. They were crying. They looked to me just like Trump supporters. And it kind of surprised me, because the only thing I've been hearing is how vicious and violent and criminal the people that are involved in the Trump or in the Hillary campaign were. And it turns out that the supporters, I was surprised to see, they look just like me. Right? I didn't see that to be true. I didn't see viciousness, violence, and the rest of that. I was kind of surprised, but I was also surprised to hear them complaining about Trump supporters as being vicious and violent. Right? And I thought, wait a second, you don't get it. And it is amazing to me how little the Hillary supporters understand about the Trump supporters, and apparently how little the Trump supporters understand about the Hillary supporters. It has been a real polarizing election. There has been great division, just as you pointed out in your article about there will be a divided U.S. public that hates the other half as a consequence of the Trump election, or I think you meant it as a consequence of the Trump election. And you don't think we're going to heal that anytime soon?
Well, I mean, that's up to us, ultimately, and it's up to people having insights and epiphanies like you just had, because it is a surprising phenomenon to see people on the other side of that fence being similar to yourself. How could that possibly be? We are almost being taught that it's almost like a different species. This is a different class of human being. This isn't like you or me. And I mean, there's so much irony here, and I have to admit, there's schadenfreude that comes along with this to see the hypocrisy. But this is the way that I contextualize this, because I've been doing the Corbett Report now since 2007, so I started in the Bush era, strongly against Bush and everything he was doing, so I was used to being called a left-wing pinko commie by the right-wingers and being loved and embraced by people on the left side of the equation. And then on January 20th, 2009, I suddenly became this right-wing fascist, literally Hitler, and people on the left couldn't understand why I wasn't enthused about hope and change Obama style, and suddenly people on the right thought that I was a sane and reasonable person. And hey, it looks like that pendulum is going to swing again. So what does this mean politically? I mean, just look at one example of this that I thought was particularly striking, and I think it encapsulates so much of what we're seeing right now. It's an article up on Slate.com, obviously a heavily left-leaning outlet, I believe part of the Washington Post group, and they wrote this article just a few hours after the election on 2:38 a.m. on November 9th. It's worse than you think. Donald Trump assumes the office of the presidency at the peak of its imperial powers and unhindered by the drag of divided government, where they say, so now we have a president-elect with authoritarian tendencies, assuming a presidency that has never been more powerful. Over the course of the past 20 years, we have invested ever more authority in the executive branch of government. We have given presidents the power to launch war without congressional consent, and we have given them the power to rewrite the crucial details of domestic policy without any legislative stamp of approval. We rarely worried about investing the presidency with such latitude. It seemed a rational response to legislative gridlock, the only way to keep the country moving, and it seemed reasonable to believe that the considerable power of the presidency would be wielded by a person who respected the Constitution and the norms of American government. Translation: all of those powers that we loved under Obama, we will now hate under Trump, and we will love once again, once it is a Democrat, once again in office in 4 to 8 to 12, whatever, however many years. How ridiculous, how saddening, what an indictment of the entire system that it works time and time and time again, that you get half of the public seeing the real problem, seeing what's really going on, seeing that what they have been doing was a mistake, and it will just swing back and forth. The pendulum will continue to swing left to right. The left will be awake, the right will be asleep, the right will be awake, the left will be asleep. And all the time, government powers continue to expand. So every time that happens, every time there is a pendulum swing, I think a few more people fall through those cracks. A few more people see the system for what it is. And this is the moment. This is the moment where we might have a chance at reaching out to some of those leftists who supported everything under Obama to maybe see why that isn't a good idea and why we shouldn't do that. But it's a small window of opportunity before people launch into the hatred, just hate anything Trump, and then love anything your team does. So we have to break through this conditioning, and this is the kind of moment of opportunity to seize that.
Does the problem you're describing have anything to do with the statement that those don't learn from history are destined to repeat it?
It's even more fundamental than that, though, isn't it? Because it's not... Yes, it is that, but it's not just that people aren't learning from it. It's that there is that mental block, that it is such an effective mental block that this is my team, and anything my team does is by definition good, and anything on the other team is by definition bad. And that's going to play out extremely interestingly over the next few months and years, because I have a fairly strong suspicion, and hey, I don't have a crystal ball, but I have a fairly strong suspicion that Donald J. Trump is not going to govern the way anyone is expecting him to govern. A lifelong Democrat with Democrat tendencies, I don't think he is actually going to be the incredible right-wing Bush on steroids that people on the left, at any rate, seem to think.
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think there's going to be some big surprises in store for everyone. And one example of this, what were the very first words to come out of President-elect Donald J. Trump? Was it, lock her up, yay, now we can do all of those things we talked about on the campaign trail? No, it was,
Hillary has worked very long and very hard over a long period of time, and we owe her a major debt of gratitude for her service to our country. I mean that very sincerely.
I understand.
I hope that people who supported Donald J. Trump, for whatever reasons they were supporting, will take a good look at what is about to happen and the things he is about to do, and look at them honestly. Not convince yourself that just because I voted for this team and this team is now in power, whatever they do is good. Look at what actually happens and be honest about it. That's all I can say to people who are on board the Trump train right now. Just be honest about what's about to happen, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be some promises reneged on. Let's put it that way.
There's a question of who's really pulling this train. Is it Donald Trump? Is he the big engine that's pulling this train? Or is it all of the people that were fed up with the establishment that said, we're going to back this guy? Is this the populist movement, or is this a Trump movement?
It is 100% a populist movement. It was the people. This is a genuine and authentic expression of a lot of people who are absolutely fed up with the status quo in every sense. The mainstream media, the politicians, the business corporate complex. This is a genuine populist movement and a genuine expression of that. And Trump is just the figurehead of that. And that's what, I mean, almost every Trump supporter that I've interacted with, that is the way they frame their support for him. It's, yeah, he lies and, whatever, he has corruption and he's not going to be perfect, but it is a big middle finger to the establishment. I get that. And in some ways, that is very healthy. That needs to happen. But once again, if people get caught up in the politics of this and start supporting the man instead of the movement, then the movement is lost. And I think this is going to be...
Is it lost, or does it just sit back and fume for another few years until they get another shot at the White House?
In some ways,
or maybe even at Congress,
right,
or the Senate.
Right. Well, that's true. But in some ways, that's even more depressing, because all that does is further reaffirm in the minds of all of these people that the only outlet that you have for affecting change in the world is to wait for your time to vote. You have to wait for the next election cycle, and then you can vote in another person who promises to do what you want them to do, and then they'll renege on that promise, and then you get to vote for another person who et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I get why 20-somethings get caught up in this and really believe in it. I am flabbergasted that people who have seen this happen over and over and over again
their
entire lives truly believe in the bottom of their core of their heart that this time it's different. I can't imagine why they believe that.
Well, a certain amount of hope. I don't know. It's what fools these mortals be. That's one thing for sure. And it has to even bewilder the politicians. They know they can fool us time and time and time again, but there's got to be a point where even they get kind of sick of it. Wouldn't they rather have an electorate who demanded politicians that were honest and had some measure of real integrity and not just telling us what we want to hear?
Well, personally, I'd rather not think of people as an electorate. I'd like to think of them as people who are individual human beings who can interact with the world and affect change in all sorts of ways that have nothing to do with the federal government or what the president of the United States will or will not do by executive fiat. And until I think that shift in consciousness and understanding takes place, then, yeah, I guess we're trapped in a system where people are just slaves to whatever politician comes along promising things to get into power. I think until we stop defining ourselves as the electorate and start thinking of ourselves as people interacting in communities of interest that we create, then the game is lost. It's not even the right game. It's like playing checkers while someone else is playing Monopoly and trying to merge those games together. If they get you to think of the game as Monopoly instead of checkers or whatever game you want to play, maybe this is a strange and strained analogy, but I hope you get the point. They've got us thinking in the wrong terms about the wrong things, and if they've got you looking for solutions in the wrong places, then who cares? You are enslaved in your mind.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Trump had a background, historical association with the Democratic Party. He ran as a Republican, and he was roundly rejected by the Republican establishment, and the Democrat establishment has shown no love for him. Is it reasonable to sit back and say that Trump is a third-party candidate who, by a kind of extraordinary miracle, it would be some people's description, but something extraordinary happened where a third-party candidate managed to capture the Republican nomination? I mean, technically, he's not a real Republican, and the evidence is that at least the establishment, Republican establishment, didn't want him. So what have we got here? Do we have a third-party candidate in the White House?
Yes, I mean, there is certainly that sense, especially when you put it in the context of him running on the Reform Party ticket in 2000. So it's literally what was a third-party candidate has taken over the Republican Party in a sense. Yeah. So it certainly isn't within that Republican-Democrat dichotomy. That Republican-Democrat dichotomy, the way it's functioned for decades, has been shattered. And we have yet to see how the pieces of that will sort out and what it'll look like, but it will not look the same. So that is some reason for perhaps some window of opportunity / optimism. But I think rather than framing it as third party, I would almost prefer to say non-party, because I am not convinced there is any ideological affiliation behind Donald Trump or his plans, such as they are. I think it is about being in the moment and what can be on each issue, what can or cannot be done, which, hey, maybe that will be a better governing style for people who are concerned about how people govern other people. But I don't think we can fit that at all into the two-party system as it's existed for decades.
Then do you see Trump less of an ideologue than you do as just a technocrat who has a certain amount of expertise to bring to the job?
It is, in a sense, yeah. I'm not sure I would use the word technocrat, but certainly that is, I think, a closer approximation. I don't think this is someone with a political ideology per se, but he does have certain political ideas that he has expressed time and time again for decades, which I think we should take seriously. One example of that: healthcare, universal healthcare. He probably will scrap Obamacare, but I'm assuming he's going to replace it with Trumpcare. He has talked over and over and over throughout the years about being on the side of universal healthcare. He wants universal healthcare. I think he's going to make it happen. I think we're going to get something very similar to Obamacare, but it will be under a different name. So those types of things, again, I think people are going to be surprised when they see it's quite opposite to what they expected.
When we return, we're going to take a break for a couple of commercials in a few seconds. When we return, we're going to start talking about globalists versus nationalists and where the world is turning right now. We're maybe moving away from globalism and toward nationalism. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that a dangerous thing? I'm Alfred Adask here with James Corbett from the CorbettReport.com. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay tuned.
Won't you take me back to school? I need to learn the golden rule.
Hi, folks. I'm Alfred Adask here with James Corbett from the CorbettReport.com, and we have been talking about the election, and I was going to move off into globalization versus nationalization right now, but maybe we want to talk about riots. Is that something we want to talk about, James?
Well, I mean, we should at least acknowledge the phenomenon. It's obviously happening as we're recording this, so who knows, where this story is going to be in half an hour, let alone a couple of days. But yes, we have seen massive protests happening in various cities, obviously a lot on the left coast, not surprisingly. And as we're recording this, apparently people have been shot in Seattle during an anti-Trump protest. So this is exactly what I have been worried about with the programmed hate, and why I think it's important to have the message of only love will win the day, will see us through these times, because unfortunately we're heading into potentially very, very, very dark times right now.
We're talking about the political division and great polarization in this country. We're talking about divide and conquer to some degree, aren't we?
Of course.
And you're suggesting that to avoid that division, you actually have to start loving your fellow man and woman, whatever.
The fellow man and woman is not some sort of, troll from another planet. It is human beings who maybe you disagree with them, maybe profoundly disagree with them. But if we start treating them as political obstacles, this is the problem with the political game. You have half the population warring with the other half over who will have control over the country. And when your half doesn't get what it wants, it starts to get angry, and that just ratchets up and up and up, so that the whole political game is just a way to keep half of the population at the other half's throats. Look where that gets us. Look at what that actually accomplishes. I wish there was some way to easily put the brake on all of this. But again, the message has to be one about love and understanding more so than hatred and division.
Do you think these riots, multiple riots, do you think these are erupting spontaneously in different locations, or are they being fostered by external forces? Say we need a bunch of riots right now. Let's have one in Seattle and one over in wherever in half a dozen cities. Are they being orchestrated, or is this coincidence?
I do not have any data on that, so I can't say definitively. I can say that if we go by recent events, not only in the United States, but in a lot of different places around the world with the color revolutions and what have you, we know there has been outside influence in these protests time and time again, but also in Ferguson, for example, where Soros was paying to bus in people from other places in order to swell the ranks of the protests. So I think we would be naive to think that is not happening, or even if it is not happening right now, that it will not happen, that this will not be amplified by people who are looking to stir that pot. And again, this plays into so many different agendas, but if you want the militarization of the police state, what better excuse to do so than by cranking up the problem so that the only solution is, oh, dear government, won't you come in with your militarized police state to save us?
Do you think that Trump could have anything to do with this, or is he so far away from the establishment it's not his business? I'm sure that people, and what I mean by that is this. You're implying that there are forces in government that would like to set up a police state. And of course, they've been doing it for some time, but they'd like to increase that. Is Trump one of those people?
Yes. Yes, I think so. I think he has authoritarian tendencies, and I think that is established on the campaign trail where he was talking about how he wants to implement the death penalty for people who shoot police officers and things like that, which, again, I don't take it seriously as a political policy proposal because there's no way that the president has any ability to do that. He cannot instate the death penalty for certain crimes with a wave of his hand like that. But I think it shows the underlying tendency and the fact that he wants to get people like Snowden and whatever. I think Snowden is a psyop in various ways, but still the sentiment is, these leakers and people are horrible people. We have to cage them and jail them, unless, of course, it's Assange who's helping me out, in which case that's all fine. So I think the authoritarian tendencies are there. I don't have the impression that Trump is part of some coordinated plan, like with the Soroses and whatever, those types of forces. I think it's just his authoritarian nature. The coordinated planning comes from the schemers, I think, more on the New World Order side, however you want to frame it, who see the chaos and see the reaction to the chaos as their way of gaining more order and control over society as part of a planned agenda to move into that more centralized control.
Speaking of George Soros, I published a link to a video of Soros being interviewed about 3 weeks ago on my blog. And Soros looked to be an old, fragile man. He was kind of shaking. He looked like he wasn't fully in control of what he was saying, and he made some extraordinary admissions. He admitted in that video that, first off, he admitted that Hillary was going to lose by a landslide, even though she's his candidate. But he went on and said that they had people in the Electoral College that essentially they'd bought and paid for who might rectify that problem. Do you think the Electoral College is likely to give us a surprise and wipe out Trump's victory and hand it to Hillary?
I do not expect that to happen. If it were to happen like that, can you imagine the reaction?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if some outside influence was looking to create a civil war, that would be the shot heard around the world. There's no way that you could put that easily back in the bottle. So I don't expect that to happen, but if the forces of chaos want chaos, that would be a great way to bring it about, wouldn't it?
I would say so. I've got an article here from Yahoo News quoting Deutsche Bank, which is interesting to me. Deutsche Bank is more in the news since it's gone bankrupt, or is technically bankrupt than it ever was while it was solvent. But the headline is "Bye-bye Globalization," and one of the bank's strategists PC writes, the world has been on a globalization trend since the end of World War II, but looking at the evidence this year, there is compelling reason to believe that globalism is dying. All right, globalism, I'm going to guess, is dying because global free trade is dying. We're in a global, something like at least a global recession, and arguably, from my perspective, a global depression. People are going to disconnect from other countries, in part perhaps to blame other countries for their problems. If we're going from globalization, are we headed to nationalization? And is that nationalization dangerous to us? Is it just a natural part of life? Sine wave, ebb and flow, up for a while, down for a while? Or is it dangerous to us? Do you see nationalization as dangerous?
It's not, I mean, it's not as simple as that. We have to look at the bigger picture of what's happening here. I think this is a repudiation of globalism as it has been proceeding, and we've seen it developing since the 90s with the WTO and what happened in Seattle and places like that, where you had clearly this open conspiracy, I guess we could call it, where the leaders and people in positions of power go to these enclaves at G20 meetings and what have you to hammer out how globalization is going to proceed behind closed doors in concert with each other in ways that the public has no ability to interact with. And they keep saying, oh, it's for the best, it's going to make a better, prosperous society, whereas people continue to get laid off and feel the effects of that. So this is a repudiation of that. It is it's a big mandate to tear up the TPP, for example, which, again, I would expect that Trump will do, but we'll have to see. But and to the extent that that happens, that is a good thing. But as always, it is a question of what is that replaced by, and what is the ultimate effect of that? We are heading into an era of more protectionist policies. And there are short-term benefits and gains that we will see about that. I mean, it's way, way, way too early to be talking about the markets and what this means and things like that. But we have seen, for example, industrial stocks going up after the markets digested what was happening and the futures plunged. But now we see the market rally, and we see, for example, industrial stocks going up on the expectation that, well, he's going to do all these protectionist policies that are going to help American manufacturing and industry. So let's invest in that, and that buoys and there's an upward pressure on wages and things. So this is all good. But let's look at the bigger ramifications of this. A couple of things come to mind. One is that the 1930s were a time of protectionism and basically the grinding to a halt of global trade and beggar thy neighbor type of devaluation policies were going on. And that really was part of the key buildup towards World War II. That is something to keep in mind. The other thing is we know, we've been talking about this over and over for years. We are living in the central bank bubble. It has been going on since the Fed started its bailouts, and since the 2008 crisis. They've been pumping in all of that money to keep stocks up, to keep bonds down. We have seen the bubble. We are living in the bubble. The bubble cannot, by definition, cannot last forever. It will crash if you bring in these protectionist and nationalist policies and the bubble pops. Guess what's going to be blamed for it? It's going to be these policies. So that's something for people, even people who are in favor of these policies, to think about. But there's the bigger picture, which I always look at, and that is that I am not against globalism per se. It's not globalism. It is not, because that puts it into a dichotomy. It's globalism versus nationalism. No, I'm against collectivism. And there are two subsets of collectivism. There's globalism and there's nationalism. They are both collectivist mindsets. So at this time, when people are looking for solutions, I hope that they will go back and ponder some things that have been talked about with regards to nationalism and how it is a dangerous collectivist ideology. And one example I'll point people to, George Orwell's Notes on Nationalism, where there's a lot to ponder in there, including where he had that famous quote, "The nationalist not only does not disapprove of atrocities committed by his own side, but he has a remarkable capacity for not even hearing about them." It's more of the team mentality. Our team, great. That team, bad. And that is a dangerous mindset to be in, whether that's happening with political parties or whether it's happening with nation states or in whatever box people are putting themselves in. It disconnects them from what is really happening, and it makes them support things they otherwise would not support.
I've only got about 3 minutes left, but I've got a question here about external threats. There are rising tensions between NATO and Russia. Are those tensions caused by simple Russian aggression, or does Russia need an external threat to hold Russia together? Is Russia under enough economic and political internal stress that they need a foreign boogeyman in order to hold Russia together?
Well, I, for one, am disgusted that the Russians put their borders so close to all these NATO bases. Clearly, what we're seeing is ramping up of the military threat from the neocons, neolibs, warhawks in the American establishment to a ridiculous degree, and I hope that is the first short-term, immediate change that we will see with this Trump presidency, which is a ratcheting down of that talk. I really hope that does take place because it is ridiculous. But you bring up a good point, which is often missed even in the alternative media, which is that type of existential threat from NATO, it certainly does have a political use for people like Putin, who is vastly, wildly popular in Russia, largely because the Russians feel, and I think it is an understandable feeling given the overall political climate, they feel an existential threat from NATO, who is threatening at their doorstep. So what happens in those times? You rally around the flag, you rally around the president. There is a political benefit that Putin reaps from that, and I'm sure he's not oblivious to that fact. So it does, like all these military conflicts, it always helps the centers of power to ratchet them up in different ways. Let's hope, and I don't put a lot of emphasis on hope and change, but let's hope that there really is a ratcheting down, because that does not benefit anyone in the general population with these ridiculous militaristic statements that have been made in recent years.
We've got rising tensions between NATO and Russia. It might serve Russia's interest to see those to create an external threat. But what about European leaders who worry about Brexit tensions within the European Union that could cause the European Union to disintegrate? Does the European Union need an external threat to hold the EU together?
That's one of the factors at play, but I think the European Union is about to face, there are elections coming up in a number of core EU countries that could see similar phenomena to what we've been experiencing. We're seeing the changing of the political landscape, how politics have been functioning. So I'm not sure the same old boogeyman warmongering in the same old ways will work to rally people in the same way as they have before. I really hope there's been a change in that, because that is obviously not the way we want to continue to proceed. Question is always what comes along to change that, or to change that calculus, and we'll have to see if the world becomes more peaceful. And if so, let's all rejoice.
If both sides, NATO and Russia, Europe and Russia, if they both need an external threat, they're both pointing fingers at each other, does that increase the possibility that this will degrade into real war? And you've only got about 10 seconds to answer.
Yes, if that's the game plan. But there are people within the hierarchies on all sides that also do not want that and are trying to steer it away from that. Let's hope that they win in that particular battle.
All right, James, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for your answers, insight, intelligence. We'll look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks. I'm Alfred Adask, and this is Financial Survival. Melody and I will be back tomorrow. In the meantime, the good Lord bless you, me, Melody, Todd, the producer, and James Corbett. Bye-bye.
Announcing the Corbett Reports 2009 video archive. Over 90 minutes of never-before-seen interviews and classic video reports, including
these major actors, a handful of financial institutions, are picking up the real economy at rock bottom prices.
Very simply speaking, I think there can't be any justifiable wars.
Well, and I think this is all basically also a big hat tip to the work that Project Censored does. And that is one of those things that, again, is always a big effective tool in the info war, is that sort of in one link you could send that out and have someone read that list and just go, oh my God, I didn't know these things.
It's a simple decision to make, but one that we must make quickly before the argument can be spun away and environmentalism can go back to business as usual.
And I didn't like what I saw from an emotional standpoint and from a scientific standpoint, from just the physics of watching the pulverization of these buildings.
Well, they came out and said, look, this report is not to be used for policy. But then they set up the summary for policymakers. The absolute contradiction of that.
I've always considered myself to be politically motivated and politically interested, but it wasn't something that I think defined my life in the way that it does now.
The Corbett Report, 2009 Video Archive. Available now on DVD. Buy your copy today at corbettreport.com.